Thank you for joining Bowtech Live and the Nate Zielinski Podcast. This is all about education, scouting, building patterns, and being successful on public land and a do-it-yourself style hunt. A huge thanks to all of our partners, including Bowtech Archery, Diamond Archery, Excalibur Crossbows, Vortex Optics, Ford Trucks, Slumberjack, Bass Pro Shops of Denver, Mr. Heater, Turkey Creek Studios, Ripcord Rest, Tight Spot Quivers, and Black Gold Sights. Join us every Monday night live at 7 p.m. Pacific on the Bowtech Archery or Nate Zielinski Facebook pages, bowtecharchery.com, and or the Nate Zielinski YouTube channel. And remember, tag and share this live feed with your friends and bring your big game questions. And here's your host, Nate Zielinski. Again, guys, welcome. Again, I am Nathan Zielinski coming to you live from the Bowtech Facebook page, the Diamond Archery Facebook page, Tightline Outdoors, and Nate Zielinski. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and a huge thanks to Bowtech for giving us their live stream platform and letting us come live to you tonight as we do every night, or every Monday evening, I should say, at 7 p.m. Pacific. So again, huge thanks to Bowtech for letting us go live. Now, guys, tonight is a special show. We're going to talk animals, we're going to talk about where you should be in your scouting process, but joining me tonight, we've got Mr. Dean Hendrickson. When it comes to wildlife, this guy right here is literally the man. He owns Rocky Mountain Wildlife Studios here in Colorado, full-blown taxidermist of all styles. He is also a guide in Alaska, spring and fall. We'll talk about that. You're also a houndsman here in Colorado. I mean, if it comes to wildlife, you've chased it, you've hunted it, you've mounted it.
Yeah, I spent a little time out in the woods.
Absolutely. No. Talk to us real quick about Alaska. Introduce yourself. I mean, so, what all have you done?
Well, I my first trip up to Alaska was in 1996. It was my once-in-a-lifetime trip. And I've been back almost 60 times now. I go up to Alaska at least 2 times, sometimes 3 times a year. I've been guiding up there for about 18 years now. We guide for brown bear down on the Alaska Peninsula. We do black bear, and then we also do moose, caribou, and grizzlies up in the Arctic.
I mean, absolutely everything. When you talk about the diehard, the men of all men, it's when chasing brown bears. So, I mean, again, you've done it all. Everybody talks about, you know, the dangerous game in Africa. I mean, the dangerous game right here in North America is those brown bears. I mean, yeah. they are out to get you. So, again, long story short, you've done it all. You've seen it all. Yeah. So, we're going to have him. Now, guys, tonight is the night to bring your questions. Again, don't be shy. We always encourage this. Comment to your friends right now. Tag them. Bring them in here. We would love to build the education. We want everybody to be successful in their hunting trips this year. But we're going to talk to you, Dean, about taxidermy. Again, This is one of those things that we get a million questions on, and so many of us don't think it's important. Whether we haven't been successful or we never thought about a mount, but it happens to everybody. All of a sudden, you get that animal on the ground, and you're like, this is the one. This is the one we want to mount, or a Euro mount, or whatever you're going to do taxidermy-wise. And so many of us are all of a sudden like, what do we do with it?
Yeah, right.
And we think we know what we do. When we show up at our taxidermist house, and it's the worst thing because you're always on that cloud 9 moment. You're excited, and your taxidermist looks in the eyes and is like, what am I going to do with this? And it's literally the popping of your bottle. You're so excited, and all of a sudden you're just shot down. So we're going to talk about all those things tonight so that doesn't happen to you. So when you get that animal on the ground, you have that rough idea of, hey, here's what I'm supposed to do. So again, we're going to talk about that. Make sure you bring your questions as we start through this. Now, before we get into all the taxidermy, we're going to bring you up to date real quick on where we're at with our scouting and our big game stuff. The last 10 days has literally been monumental for all of our scouting, especially in kind of those Rocky Mountain regions. So Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, those areas have been phenomenal because of the heat. Now, as a Western big game hunter, we all hate the heat. We're like, man, it's July, it's 100 degrees during the day. How am I supposed to prep for big game season? But we're letting that actually help us along. So, number one, we are now having green grass throughout the entire elevation system. So whether you're hunting at 12,000 feet or 13,000 feet or down at 4,000 feet, you have food for these animals. So now the food source is everywhere. Just a month ago, we still had a lot of snow in the extreme high country, and the grass wasn't quite there and the animals weren't there. Now the animals are where they're going to be 100% for your upcoming hunting season. Really it's early July when we first start saying that these animals are throughout the whole system, but right now, if they're there today, they're going to be there for your hunting season more than likely. So we're excited about that. The other big thing that the heat does is it really brings on strong patterns. So we love the fact that these animals are feeding at certain times of the day, usually early and late, but they're bedding down very, very, uniform. almost on a daily pattern. They're bedding down at the same time, same place. Again, the heat builds these patterns. So we're excited to see that we're starting to build a time reference. Hey, they're feeding from now to now. They're bedding down from now to now. They're also drinking in that uniform pattern. So again, the heat really brings on those patterns. Yes, it shortens the cycles. They're not out during the day as much as maybe they will be on a cooler day. But regardless of if they're out 10 minutes or out an hour, it's a pattern, and we love to see those patterns. And again, those patterns are holding true with those high temps. So we're excited to see those temps just for the fact that it's building those patterns. So if you are getting out there scouting, whether you're just starting or you've been doing it, now is the time to what you're learning today, you'll be able to replicate and do late August, September, and even October, because again, the cycles are here. So everything today should be important this coming hunting season. With that said, if you were out scouting 2 weeks ago and you weren't seeing animals, I would tell you not to worry. Again, everything's building its cycle. The elk are calving, you know, all the deer are having their fawns. It's not a big deal. If you've been out scouting the last week or so and you're not seeing animals, now you better start having some fear. These animals are in their daily patterns. So now that we're in that phase 2 of scouting and it's all about the animals, if you're not seeing animals, you better start spending a little bit more time in the woods working on your patterns. Again, that relationship between food, water, and bedding. But again, now is where you should be seeing your animals. You're not seeing the animals, start looking at new areas, different times. Get out there and hunt a little harder and scout a little harder to find these patterns and build that up. If you are seeing animals, build the pattern. It's going to follow through. Now, the one other thing before we start talking taxidermy that is really helpful in this high heat, it's drying up all the springtime water holes. So we talked about water. We talked about how water is so crucial in the beginning of the hunting season. When it's high temps, the animals are going into rut. They're utilizing water a lot. So water is very important in the fall for us as hunters, especially in a pre-rut situation. We can get out there and we can hunt water when they're not calling, when they're not actively chasing them, and it can be a very successful way to put these animals on the ground. 3 weeks ago, when we still kind of have those somewhat late spring, early summer temps, we still have snow melt, we still have a lot of moisture, and all of a sudden you go out there to scout and there's puddles and ponds and creeks and there's water everywhere, and you're asking yourself as a hunter, which one of these is important? How do I know which water hole to set up, which ones are hitting? But now that we're in those high temps, again, we like them. Everybody hates them. I like the high temps. Because now all of a sudden it dried up all the small sources. So the small creeks that are strictly runoff, they've shut down. The small little nooks and crannies, you know, under a rock that had moisture, it's now dried up. So the water that you're finding now in middle of July is the same water that'll probably be there this coming hunting season. So again, if you scouted out water holes 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago, and you think you had a source, go back and check them now and see if they still have water, what that water level is. The areas that you thought might be a wallow, check them now and see if they're bone dry, if they're still moist, if they're still swampy, if they're still that black mud. But again, the heat is helping us out. So number one, make sure that you're watching your animals. You should be on a pattern now, and those patterns are going to hold true to this coming hunting season. If you're not on the pattern, make sure you put a little energy in there to find that. And again, we'll talk about that. You can always private message me and we'll help you in your unique situation to make sure you're successful. Also comment here and we can talk about your situation and maybe what's going wrong in that area. The other thing, check your water holes. Water is crucial this time of year. You can start to where you're setting trail cameras on that. You can start watching the water for animal and animal movement. But more importantly, the bad water, the water that's not going to exist, is now gone. So the water that you have now is extremely important. So make sure you keep that in mind because, again, the water now is going to carry you to hunting season. We start to put a lot more importance and education into that water because, again, it's going to help us out in the fall. So, again, that's where you should be with your animals. Now, we're going to talk about that a little bit later as we get more questions. But, again, comment. Bring your questions tonight. Now, Dean, we've been talking about this, prepping. We're talking about water holes. It's going to happen. So the sheep hunts in Colorado, and there's a couple of sheep hunts I'm going on, are literally early August, August 5th.
Weeks away.
Pronghorn is the 15th. Elk and deer rolling in later August, most of these western states. So the hunting season upon us. I mean, there's places on the Arizona Strip that, 3 weeks we're going to be hunting elk. So no matter where you're at, it's becoming close. Now, there's so many of us that are watching this and our viewers that are seasoned out here. They're like, hey, man, I know what you want to get an animal on the ground. That's great. I would definitely still pay attention because what happens in a taxidermist studio is much different than what we do as a hunter. And there's just little things. It's a daily profession. You don't go into a guy that is a mechanic and tell him how to work on his car. It's one of those things. And I know that myself personally, I get a lot of criticism. Everybody says, man, you're a great hunter. You are a terrible skinner. to me and to my hunters that I take and my friends and everybody else, I do a great job and I get it off the mountain. And it is definitely of style to be mounted. But when you guys get it and you actually start doing it, you're like, you're far from being where it needs to be. It's just one of those things. And it's hard as a hunter to get that done. And a lot of times we're facing unique situations in the woods where you got to be fast because it's getting dark or it's cold or it's so hot you're worried about your meat. Stuff happens. Or, I mean, half the time, a bull falls over in a canyon, you're trying to skin him with one leg in the air, and whatever the case may be, there's a lot that goes into it. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So the big three that we're going to talk about, number one, a shoulder mount. That's probably the most common taxidermy mount that we're going to do. So we're going to talk about that. Also, with the sheep thing, not that many people get life size, but you're seeing it more common. Guys are building their trophy room, and they'll put animals all over the place, and they'll have that one unique feature in their trophy room to have one life size. Whether that's a bobcat, which we see a ton of, or it's a sheep or an elk or whatever the case may be. So we're going to talk shoulder mount, life size, and then the number one thing we're talking about is European mounts. I want to talk about that, but that's going to be last.
Huge.
Absolutely. Euros is the big thing. I mean, making works of art out of them. So, shoulder mount, number one thing. Whether it's a pronghorn, a sheep, an elk, I have this animal on the ground. The one mistake I would say you see the most is not leaving enough hair.
Absolutely.
But
great point.
What's too little? What's too much? What are my cuts?
Okay, great point. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't have pedestal mounts. Okay, so with these newer forms these days, we need more cape.
Everything is getting longer. There's no doubt about it.
Just keep this in mind. You can't have too much cape. Okay. But you can always cut it too short, and we can't add skin if we don't have it.
Can't add it.
When you're doing for a shoulder mount, just cut it between the front and the back legs. That's going to give you plenty of cape if you end up doing a pedestal mount. Okay, we need a lot more cape because we're going to wrap it around the back side.
And I think people, when they think pedestal, they're instantly thinking a big thing in the middle of their room. There's pedestal mounts that go on your wall. I mean, it's just a little more turn. I mean, again, things have changed. If you haven't had anything mounted, a lot's changed. There's a lot new forms.
Yeah, the newer forms show a lot more of the shoulder.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so just keep that in mind. Don't cut it short.
Front shoulders are minimum. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Front shoulder. So literally draw a line from that leg up.
Yep.
Absolutely no closer than that.
No closer. Yeah. And then so once you if you can decide in the field if you're going to do a life size or a rug or a shoulder mount, that's going to help you out. Biggest thing, be prepared. Make a decision ahead of time what you want to do if you get that animal on the ground, because you don't want to have the animal on the ground and say, I'm not sure if I want a life size or a shoulder mount.
No,
and because why would you want to pack out that whole hide if you don't have to?
No.
So
for sure.
We're all about that.
Definitely. So. Now, as far as cuts, so shoulder mount. So we're saying as far as our distance back, we're staying at the shoulder. Now, you hear guys tubing these animals out. You hear guys cutting down the back of the neck. I mean, somebody who has no clue, they think you can stitch it shut. Our basic couple cuts on a shoulder mount. We're not going anywhere near the front of the animal.
No.
Walk us through our very basic cuts on that shoulder mount.
Just keep this in mind. If it's going to be a shoulder mount, you're not going to see the cuts if it's on the back. So no cuts in the front. We do what's called a Y cut. So in between the antlers, you come back, and then from there you do a straight cut right down would be the center of the mane. Okay, and keep that cut nice and straight, and keep it in the center, because there's typically more hair right in the center, and that helps hide the sewing. And it just makes a better overall mount.
Absolutely. So. Then what on the lower half? So we got a cut going right from basically between the ears, going down to the center of the back, past the front shoulder. And then what are we doing on the legs? So we cut the kneecaps, going behind the leg.
Just go above the kneecap, about halfway between the knee and the shoulder. And that's going to give you plenty, because some of that skin is actually used on a lot of these newer forms again.
Absolutely.
They're showing a lot more of the shoulder, so just keep that in mind.
Definitely. So we cut around there, and then we follow the back of the leg up?
Yeah, right up the back of the leg, and that's going to intersect with your cut that you made around the center of the animal.
Yep. And we just peel it off and come all the way to the top.
Right.
Now, that's the big question there, to where I think so many guys get concerned. So we got our main cuts, we're peeling, cutting, doing our best to get it up to the head. Now, this is really situational, and I really say this to everybody, because obviously, as a hunter, we want our mount to look the best. Obviously, for you, most of us are buddies with our taxidermists. We all know them. That's the place we hang out. But we don't want to make more work for you. We don't want to ruin anything. So when all of a sudden you get that cape up to the head, now's when all of a sudden you have some options. You can cut off at that top joint, taking the head, wrap that whole thing up, and say, hey, I'm bringing it to him.
Right.
I'll let him cape the face.
Sure.
A lot of times in some of the situations that a lot of us are going to be in, we're so far back in the woods that that skull and that extra weight could kill us. You know, all of a sudden, I mean, on an elk, we got, antlers and cape. And I mean, you're 70, 80 pounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so in certain times we can't.
Or like me, I spent a month in the field in Alaska, and you don't have an option. Yeah, you have to get that cape off of there. You have to get the lips and the ears turned, and you have to get the flesh off of it and get it salted. Yep. So, if you're hunting here in Colorado where you can get that thing to a taxidermist within no longer than 48 hours, then you're okay.
Now that's a big tip. So again, everybody asks, is it an hour, is it 40? I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on temperature, moisture content, your job as a skinner. But again, 48 hours when you start to see hair stuff, when you start to see decay.
And that's if you can keep it in the shade and keep it cool. If that thing gets in the sun at all,
couple hours.
A couple hours, it's going to be gone. So you got to keep it cold. And one of the only ways to keep it cold is if you can get that entire cape off the animal. So this is the time where you should be talking to your taxidermist and asking him, how do you want me to bring it to you? Yep. Can you show me how to cape this out? Caping it off, it doesn't mean cutting it off at the head. Caping it off is bringing the skin entirely off the face. And that's important.
No, and I think that's one of the big things you hit a nail on the head is have that relationship with your taxidermist. How many of you right now, I mean, literally, I'm pointing at you because I want you to think to yourself, do I have a taxidermist? Do I know one? Because so many of us don't. Right now, go shopping. Go into their studio. If you walk in and you don't like their mounts, introduce yourself and say, hey, I just want to know where you're at, and walk out. Walk into a taxidermist studio where you're like, wow, this is impressive. And that's the guy you want to talk to. When you find that guy, like this guy right here, Rocky Mountain Wildlife Studios, that's when you got to say, hey, man, I don't know if it's going to happen to me this year. I know that I've been scouting more than ever. I know I'm more prepared than ever. If I'm lucky enough to get that animal on the ground, what do I do? And it's huge. So bring it back to you real quick. So we got a Y. So we're going from antler down to the ears, basically, making this little Y cut coming down. Right. If I do, let's say it's a situation, I mean, a lot of times for me personally, if I'm within a couple miles, I chop the head, I bring it to the taxidermist. I've skinned off a million of them, but if I can have you do it, who's better?
Absolutely.
Better. So if all of a sudden it's a situation, though, to where I'm so far back in, I can't do it. Walk us really quick, taking that off the face. I mean, everything seems easy until all of a sudden I hit the eye and I hit that tear duct. When I hit that tear duct, I'm always like, oh man, I'm nervous.
One of the most common cuts that we get is right on the inside of the eye or on the outside of the eye. Okay, so as you're pulling that cape off the head, basically, the first thing you're going to do is find the ear butt. You're going to cut both the ear butts off, okay? And then you're going to continue skinning it down. When you get close to the eye, the best trick that best tip that I can give you guys is I stick my finger inside the eye from the outside, and as I'm skinning on the inside, you're not going to cut your own finger. Okay? So you're going to be pulling out the eye, the skin around the eye as you're skinning it, okay? And if you do that, you're very unlikely you're going to make the two bad skinning cuts.
Seriously, that's the best tip I've ever heard. You're not going to cut your own finger.
Right.
So it helps you out.
When I start working on the face, the first thing I do before I even cut the earbuds or anything, I start on the inside of the mouth from the outside, okay? And I make that cut right above the teeth all the way around the inside of the mouth. And then I start skinning from the from the neck, basically. And then once you get down to that point, when you're close to the mouth, I stick my finger up inside the mouth and I find that cut again. Now as you're skinning from the inside, you can feel it, and you know exactly where you're at. So it works really easy. It takes practice.
Absolutely. Now, one of the big things I think, too, when I do it myself is we all get in a hurry. Our meat's sitting here. We're excited. I mean, the adrenaline gets to you. A couple things real quick I want you to touch base is small cuts. Everybody, when they're skinning, they get in this habit of doing these big cuts. When it comes down to the face, use literally the last 1% of the tip of that knife. I mean, everything we're doing. We got some knives here, but I mean, literally cut with the tip and cut slow. And then where should we be pointing our knives? Into the body, towards the hide?
I actually do it in towards the body a little bit more than a lot of people.
Protect yourself.
So one of the best things that came out years ago was these knives that are replaceable razor blades. I love them.
Okay? A couple of manufacturers out there.
Outdoor Edge is one I happen to use. start with a really sharp knife, and believe it or not, a sharper knife will cut less holes.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Because you're
guys,
not hacking away.
Talked about that. So the outdoor edge knife, you literally push a button, take a blade off. So you can be out there every time you skin an animal, you can throw a new blade on it. And there's a lot of companies out there making it, whatever manufacturer you want to go with. But sharp knife's huge. Small cuts. Again, you'd rather take a lot of time and have no holes in your cape than make that one slip and put that big gouge, especially around the eyes, the nose, the ear ducts, or the tear ducts.
Just take your time.
It's huge. So again, think about all that. If you are going to do that style method, make sure you're prepared. Again, a lot of times I take the skin off the face, and if I'm out there in the woods, I'm all about losing weight. I just spent the time to debone this animal. Once that cape's off, I bring a small Wyoming saw with me, cut the horns off. I mean, I cut the antlers right off there in the woods. I cut basically right down through the eye sockets, right from the back of the head, make a nice square cut. Antlers off, leave all that in there, and you're good to go.
Yeah. And that's a good point. With us, is packing out the least amount of weight because we end up, with too much weight as it is. So I always have a Wyoming saw with me to cut the antlers off. I also will leave as much flesh on the skin side, or I mean on the carcass side. And so when I'm packing that cape out, I have less weight. I packed a brown bear cape out one time. We got it back to the, fortunately, I had to go about a quarter mile. We were able to get a plane in fairly close to where we were at. We got it back to the lodge, and it weighed 212 pounds. So I'm all about
a little bit of meat on there goes a long ways.
Yeah, exactly. So
and that's one of those things that we talk about that with fleshing, because I mean when it actually comes to the taxidermist, people don't realize what's going on. They're actually going to cut the membrane on the side of the skin and basically break it down to where there's nothing there but actual true leather and hide, and go from there. So not only are they taking out the meat, they're taking off basically a slight little membrane there. But that's huge, and we're going to talk about it before the end about the whole salt situation, but we're going to continue with this cut first. But again, that's going to be your situation. I take off as much meat as possible, but I don't risk damaging the hide. But I'm not a taxidermist. Somebody like you in the woods, when your animal comes out, you're flawless. Me, I make the best cuts I can, but I still get a little nervous of that. So you got to find that right balance of getting as much off as you can without bringing it to you with 4,000 holes in it. Now that's the shoulder mount. So again, rough idea. From basically the base of the antlers, taking a Y down towards the ears, down towards the center of the back, past that front leg, the further the better, down to the belly, above the kneecap, cutting up, join that same cut, peel it all off to the front. Shoulder mount. Again, we can walk you through this later, guys, if you have more questions. Again,
there's some great YouTube videos.
Absolutely, YouTube will walk you through it. Now, opposite side, we're going to talk about a life size. We're also, when I'm talking life size, we're going to throw the rug thing in there. So again, bear hunting is getting more popular. Our bear population in any state you go to, I don't care where you're at, our bear population is exploding. We have more bears than we've ever had. So a lot of states are encouraging bear tags. They're making it easier on the hunter to get bear tags. A lot of guys are picking this up, and a lot of guys shoot this first bear, and they're like, what do I do with a bear? Unbelievable rug. And we're doing rugs out of everything. I mean, guys make a cow elk makes the most beautiful rug you've ever seen. So regardless, we want to do a life-size animal or a rug. Cuts are totally different. Even myself, when I'm cutting up a rug or a life-size, in my head, what a leg looks like laying out is not necessarily what I think it is. So every time I make this cut, I'm like, oh, this is perfect centered. Then I lay the rug out, and it's all lopsided, and I'm like, how did that cut not work out?
So when you're doing skinning for a rug, that is absolutely the most important time to take your time and make sure your cuts are straight and even. When I say even, when you are cutting up the belly, for example, you cannot be an inch off, because think about it. Once you get that rug back and you lay them out flat, you're going to have, it's going to be 2 inches off. You have an inch extra over here and less, minus an inch over here. So, and same with the legs. Each cut between the left leg and the right leg has to be exactly the same place.
Now, roughly speaking, where are we cutting on that leg?
It's going to be right up the back side of it.
Sometimes a little hair discoloration right there, thicker to thin.
There's actually kind of a seam right there. And it's just really important, if you cut, a 1/2 inch off on this leg, do the exact same over here.
Whatever we're making it even.
Because again, when you lay it out, you don't want, one leg farther forward than the other. So skinning for a rug is really important. Make sure your cuts are straight and equal between left and right side.
Now, life size real quick, and this is a question that I honestly go back and forth with. So let's say I'm going to mount a fox coyote, whatever, a sheep, a mountain goat. Are my cuts depending on my mount? If my mount's low or high, are my cuts the same? Do I cut on top of the back if it's going up in the ceiling? If it's my cuts low, walk us through the general cuts on a life size. Because I would say that the small game, the bobcat, the coyote, you're seeing more and more of this coming in as a decorational piece.
Right.
You know, everybody's against it, but all of a sudden your wife sees one, and you get the bobcat chasing the feather, and it's really a great mount for any house. But how do we do these life size mounts?
What Nate's talking about here is what we call a dorsal cut. Okay, and you definitely want to talk to your taxidermist. Some taxidermists do not like dorsal cuts.
And every taxidermist is different.
Everyone's
that's a big
different.
Thing to say.
The whole idea behind it is the seam is going to be down the back. So if you want to mount an animal standing up like a brown bear or somebody standing on his back feet, you might consider a dorsal cut down the back.
Because all you're seeing is the front.
Exactly. Because all the front's going to be shown, and you don't want a bunch of seams in the front. So talk to your taxidermist and see if he prefers a dorsal cut for a standing mount like that.
Okay. So, and then if it's not that, we're cutting down the front. Where's those cuts at? I mean, from chin straight down to...
If you're doing a rug, it's going to be cut. You're going to start just below the... several inches below the lip line. Because if you think about that, the form, you only need about 2 or 3 inches below the lip line. And then you start your cut underneath, and that goes all the way down to the tail. Okay. And again, that has to be right down the center.
So center, straight down right to the belly, then right out the legs, right out the arms, and again, everything is
super straight.
And then we're just peeling it off.
Yep.
And that's a big thing, because so many of us do shoulder mounts, and once you get that shoulder mount off, we go to town and we just start ripping and cutting and poking holes, and it's just what it is. When all of a sudden it's a rug or a life size, that rear section, all of a sudden, it gets a little tricky. Everything gets a little tight as you're trying to remove it. And just take your time and make all your cuts even and peel it off there. And that's a big deal for that. Now, so that's rugs life size. Talked about that roughly. Again, guys, we're going to give out his number at the end. You can always contact me on Facebook. Contact, again, Wildlife Studios. You have questions, private message us on Facebook. We'll give out some numbers. Contact us. We can walk you through it. Again, go find your personal taxidermist. I know this is fast. Again, YouTube's a great resource, but make sure you know what you're doing. Now, before we take some questions, we got some great questions coming, but European mounts. This is literally probably the hottest trend. Whether you have, and when we say European mount, we're talking just the skull. So again, like these bulls right here, you can see them. So again, you're talking just the skull of this animal. Now, with that said, with these European mounts, like I used to guide, for 11 years, and the taxidermist that we were working with, I could kill a bull tonight, and I could pick it up tomorrow night on my way out of town. And when you picked it up, it looked great. Now, these guys are skinning it, taking off all the flesh, boiling it, blowing it out with a pressure wash or the car wash at midnight so they don't get caught, doing their thing, bleach it, and send it home. Now, you can go to a lot of your major retailers right now, and you can buy a Euro kit. You can buy the bleach, and you can do it. Now, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not picking on anybody, because there's taxidermists that are hating me right now because they're all like, well, that's what I do. The only reason I bring this up is because I have a studio at my house. I think I got 15 muleys mounted. It's one of those things, I just get Euros on muleys. I love it because I got a massive display. Now, you look up on my wall, and you start on this side right here, right? I was 16 when I started killing them. And you look and look and look, and about right here, I met this guy next to me. And all of a sudden, you look here. So you look at the wall, and you're like, boy, those are yellow, 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 yellow. Whoa, that one's white. Why is that half white? And you're thinking, they must be in the sun. Or you know what? Age must have got to those, but it's not the case. So you use beetles.
Okay, I use...
Walk us through the entire process, the in-studio stuff and stuff that I don't think anybody realizes. And when people get Euro mounts back, I said, how fast did it come back? If they say it came back in a week or two, I know something's wrong.
So I use domestic beetles. It's a flesh-eating beetle. Once I get a skull in... there's still a little bit of work preparing it for the beetles. I take the eyes out and the brain matter, and I peel off as much meat as I can. At that point, I actually freeze them also, and that just is to prevent any mites or any other
getting in with your beetle.
Yeah, we don't want to infect the beetle colony. So I keep. We have about 4 or 5 beetle colonies going during the entire season, and we use chest freezers. Okay, and so. After you've frozen the skull to make sure you don't have any mites or anything,
whatever.
So that skull will go inside the beetles, and it take them anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 days to clean all the flesh off of that skull. Okay. Now at that point, looks good, but it's still a natural looking skull. The next step is absolutely the most important step, and this is one that very rarely gets talked about.
And this is the one that's missed by 80% of the Euro mounts.
At that point, you have to degrease that skull, and that for a deer is going to take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, depending on the deer. Yeah. For something like a bear or a hog, that could take 2 or 4 months.
Extremely greasy type animal. And age can have a big due to this too. Density of the bone.
Exactly. There's a lot of different factors. Every skull is different. Yeah. But
now the bear, you're talking months.
Months to get out. To degrease.
I mean, you're adding temperature and degreasing agents.
So the degreasing, what we use is it's basically a water solution with some soap in it, and then we have to heat it to 120 degrees, and you have to maintain that heat the entire time. Okay,
months of heat.
Yeah, exactly. So and you have to change out water multiple times during that degreasing process, and that's a super important step. When Nate mentioned these yellowing skulls, that's what he's talking about.
Doesn't matter how much bleaching agent or peroxide you add, it comes through in time.
If there's grease in that skull, eventually it's going to work its way out. It could be a year or 2 years down the road.
And people sometimes have stinky animals. They even have bugs coming out because they missed that step.
Exactly, right. So after we degrease it, then it goes into a whitening agent. We use 28% peroxide, and it's dangerous stuff. We wear goggles and gloves. You got to be really careful with this stuff. Very careful. The whitening takes 24 to maybe 48 hours at the most.
You got to be careful because if you add too long, you can eat up everything.
Exactly. It starts working away on the bone. So you got to be really careful with that. But at that point, it comes out. It takes several days to dry, and we actually also put them out in the sun to help dry them, and it helps whiten them a little bit more. And then I actually put a sealing coat on them, and that's also important because once you set a skull up on a shelf in your house, dust starts to build up on it, and after 6 months or a year, you wipe that down, and that dust it gets worked into the bone, and so if you put a seal coat on it, you can just wipe that skull off with a damp rag once a year or so, and it's going to look like the day you picked it up.
I mean that's literally the true process of a European mount. I mean, it's what it is. It's time consuming, but I would say every state you're in, every county that you're in, wherever you're watching from, if you're in Florida, Pennsylvania, right here in Colorado, wherever you're at, I promise you, there is a taxidermist in your area that's using beetles.
Absolutely.
I can promise you also there's a taxidermist that's doing it the old-fashioned way.
Absolutely.
Nothing wrong with it, but again, if you want the correct thing, if you want something that's going to be in your house. Now, if you're throwing it up in the garage, do whatever. But if you want that white skull, it's going to be in your house. It's going to be a piece of art. That's where all of a sudden taking those steps is huge. Now, the beetles is great. It's a great to get it cleaner. You're going to have a better system for it all. Now, Dean, that's a big bowl. It's hard to manage, but grab that thing. I want to show the nasal cavity. This is going to be awkward, guys. We don't have the right camera to zoom in on this, but something that you get with beetles that you will never get with anything else is inside this nose. Point out some cartilage in there. When you pressure wash.
This one doesn't have it. Try that one out. Yeah.
As we take all these bulls to shows after show after show, and they get a little trash being in the truck. But all the unique stuff.
So you can see this, the cartilage inside this nasal cavity here. It's really delicate, and literally you can touch it and it's going to fall apart sometimes. So that's the type of detail that you get with using domestic beetles.
So we'll set this down. Now, guys, again, that's something that if you're doing a normal Euro mount to where you're pressure washing these animals, that's the one spot that they hit with the pressure washer. They're hitting right in the eye sockets, but most importantly, that nasal cavity goes straight to the brain. So that literally, if you're getting a normal mount, they take the pressure washer to that, and that cartilage is gone. The only way to keep that cartilage is to do the beetle type situation. Yeah, right. So again, so many things you get with the beetles. It's gonna get you a better mount, a cleaner mount, and then the degreasing agent. I mean, that bull's gonna be that white. That's a killed that bull in 2014. That bull in 20 years is going to be that white because it was done the proper way. Right. So again, think about those type of situations. Now, Dean, we're getting a lot of questions. People are excited about this, so we're going to field some questions now. But again, tonight's show, huge thanks to Bowtech for letting us go live here. Again, ask your question. We want to field them. If we missed your question, make sure you keep it on here. We'll get on this feed in the next 24 hours or so. We'll make sure every question is answered. But again, I'm Nate Zielinski. Guys, thank you so much for watching. If you just stayed tuned in, we got Dean Hendrickson from right here, Rocky Mountain Wildlife Studios. Now, Dean, we talked about it. We know where our animal's at. Again, we're in full pattern. If you missed the beginning of the show, Where your animals are at right now, more than likely, is where they're going to be during your hunting season. If you're an average bow hunter, early rifle hunter, or muzzleloader, they're going to be in those same areas. Moral of the story, if you're not on animals by now and you're scouting, something's wrong. Go find animals. Hunt harder, scout harder, put in a little more time, because, again, you should be seeing animals now. If you're not, something's going on. If you're on animals, build a pattern. Now, real quick, we're going to go to some questions, and again, tag your friends. Bring more questions. Guys, we'll stay on here a little longer as long as you guys keep fielding the questions. So let's have a couple questions there, Manny.
Steve from Colorado wants to know if it's too late to set up his cameras.
So he wants to know, number one, if it's too late to set up cameras. Absolutely not. Right now is when we're just starting our camera setup. So a lot of people put cameras out a little early. The problem with actual setup cameras early in the season, number one, is when these animals are going through their calving. So when the elk are calving, when the does are dropping fawns, they're at a higher stage of alert. This is when most of these animals, if they have a rough go in life, as far as this year's young, the coyotes prey on them, the lions prey on them, the bears prey on them. But it's really in that first month that they have a hard time. So if people are setting cameras in June, early July, really early July, but mainly June, these animals are so easy to spook. You have they're more on alert. So snapping a twig in June hurts you more than snapping a twig in July, if that makes sense. So absolutely not. Now that these animals are in their patterns, now that our water holes are drying up because of the heat, now is the time to set those cameras. Again, a camera for us is a tool. It's not a bragging mechanism. We don't want to send all our pictures to our buddy and be like, look at the bull I found. Send him the picture once you have that animal on the ground. Use a camera for a tool. Set it up on trails. Set it up on water holes. Water holes is the absolute most important thing for a camera, in my opinion. But you're trying to learn timing. So when you have that camera set up, you want to know when these animals are in a certain area, when they're leaving their bedding grounds, when they're coming to their bedding grounds, when they're drinking, when they're in feeding areas. So it's number one, it's a timing tool. Again, the tip that we always talk about with cameras, a lot of people miss this. If there's one thing you take from tonight, take this. On all of our cameras, when we're 15, 20 feet from the camera, we always hang a ribbon. Hang a piece of string or ribbon, something to where when you have wind current, even just a light thermal, that string will vary. Now, if you have it too close to the camera, it's going to trigger your camera, and you're going to have 20,000 pictures of your string. But if it's far enough back, again, every picture you take, you're going to have this big buck, this bear, this bull in the camera, and you're going to see that string or that piece of material swinging one way or the other. And all of a sudden, you're going to say, hey, I know this animal's drinking at so-and-so time, which is great. I see him walking in from a certain area. That's fantastic. But now, all of a sudden, I see my string swaying, and I say, hey, every time this animal drinks, my wind is sucking up canyon, down canyon. All of a sudden, I know where he's bedding. I know where my wind's at. It's literally so simple. Go set up, animal on the ground. Yep. So again, Steve, absolutely. Now is the time to set your cameras. From now all the way up into hunting season, we're heavy on the cameras. So definitely get out there and set those cameras. Next question.
All right. So somebody from Instagram is asking, I always learn to cut up the chest. Are there any animals you wouldn't make a back cut on?
So absolutely, as far as doing the taxidermy, he wants to know he's always made a chest cut. Again, it's always going to depend on what animal. And, if you have a lot of fur on an elk, they can sew it. It's not that you can't sew it. Yeah. You're just going to have a better looking mount in time, especially if you happen to get the animal that doesn't have enough fur on that front. Yeah. Yeah. But no, I mean,
especially the early season animals come in, they're a lot lighter on hair. You wait a month later and their hair's gone to the winter hair and it's a lot thicker hair on it. So
generally speaking, though, I would say learning a rear cut is going to be better for your mounts in the course of time. Rugs, life size, there's definitely a place for it, but the average shoulder mount, the average life size mount, I would say, generally speaking, you're going to put most of that emphasis on the back cut. So again, antlers or even face, if it's not even, you're mounting something that doesn't have antlers, you're going to getting between those ears coming down and right down the center of that spine and find the hair. I always tell people that, you see where the two hairs come together, you kind of get a wavy effect where the two sides are coming together. Cut it right down there. Imagine if you're going to hide something. Yeah. Imagine, go down that animal and you can literally pull it apart like you're separating, something on a human. Find those different areas, find where that hair is thick and make that cut right through there. And again, a lot of times I'll start my cut and I'll actually step back and look. Yeah. The elk are the worst. That bull we just had here, big 370 bull, when they're laying on the ground, their antlers hold their head up. Yeah. It's so easy to start cutting. All of a sudden you're like, boy, I'm running right down the side of his neck. Right. So depending on how your animal's positioned, really, step back and figure out where it's at. And a lot of times I'll even take my hand back and don't cut it, but keep that finger in guidance to where the center's at. So stop, look at those fingers, come to it, step back, cut to it. But again, that can be huge, and a sharp knife goes a long way. But generally speaking, I would say going down the back is gonna get you a lot better results than going down the front.
Eric is asking about velvet care in the field and home Euro with velvet.
Good.
There's a lot of sources out there for velvet now. You're going to talk about, but the options of saving what you have or the artificial stuff. Now the artificial stuff has come a long ways. I mean, years ago the artificial stuff, it looked like fake turf. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Nowadays it's pretty
definitely
awesome,
gotten a lot better. You know, the natural velvet will always look much better, but sometimes it's impossible to keep that natural velvet. If you want to try and save your natural velvet, I cannot stress enough how important it is to get the skull off of the animal and get it into a freezer as fast as you can.
So freezing, that's our goal.
If you're, you know, on
high country or
in a different state or something, you know, find a local freezer where you can get it into the freezer, go back, you know, finish your hunt, you know, and then
do whatever you gotta do.
Head home with that, at least it's frozen. And you got to be careful handling velvet antlers, because if they're within a few days of shedding that velvet, you can literally grab that velvet and it's just going to come right off in your hand. So
or even just
really,
smashing
really
it down. Absolutely.
Yeah, be really careful handling.
Even for the sake of photos, I can say. Now we talked about this. You know, a good friend of ours, John, shot that big giant muley with velvet, and it was right on that cusp.
Right on the edge.
Even to the point to where photos, you see these big velvet bucks, and I see guys just grabbing them, and I'm just cringing. I mean, photos, hold it by the ears. When you're skinning it, hold it by the ears. Everything you do, and the hardest thing is tying a pack.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, everything you do, every stick you bump on the way out.
Right. They'll nick it.
More so even than the care of the actual taxidermy side, a lot of it's up to us hunters in the woods.
Yeah.
You know, it starts right there. Photos, while you're skinning it, packing it out. It's all about that gentleness. Now, I hear a lot of guys that say they wrap them with bags. They wrap them with this. What's your take on that? Are we just trying to be gentle, or is there a way to protect it as we're coming out?
Yeah, I think they're trying to protect it because, like you mentioned, if you brush by a tree limb or something, it's going to tear that velvet right off. So you just got to be super careful handling velvet, and you got to get them cooled down.
And then once it's frozen, eventually, what does it get? A formaldehyde, or what actually happens to it?
Yeah,
when
well, there's several different
Okay.
velvet tans out there nowadays, and it is a little difficult of a process, especially when you're doing a Euro mount with velvet. We do those all the time, but
and they talk about moisture. They grease for 6 months.
right. So anyway, you know, there's several different ways to do it, and it's going to take a little bit longer, but it's definitely worth it because they're beautiful mounts, especially the Euros with velvet. I think are amazing.
Absolutely. You know, and I will say that, let's say you're to the point to where that animal's not going to save the velvet. We definitely had it to where guys think it's good, and I mean, you take it out of the freezer, and the second it thaws, it's just peeling off. A lot of guys are doing the replica velvet. The biggest thing I can say to that is it's all about the artwork. So our good friend, Bobby Schmack, he owns Turkey Creek Studios. I mean, full-blown taxidermy. You know, he's all about the birds, turkeys, pheasants, ducks. But he literally takes that velvet and he puts it through an entire process of roughing it up. I mean, I see him in his house. He's outside walking through the bushes with these things. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, well, when we get it back from the fake velvet, it looks so fake. Nothing looks like that. So he out roughs it up, and I mean, he's putting blood marks back into it. So there is options if you have lost it, but you got to make sure whoever does the replication, like you spend a lot of time in the authenticity, authentic, whatever. You got to make sure that you have a taxidermist willing to take the steps of not just spraying it with the artificial turf and calling it good. You have to go through, you have to mat it, you have to walk it through some brush, you have to add character, and then you can kind of bring back that lifestyle. But taking care of that animal from the woods, I would say, in my opinion, is hands down the most important thing you can do. I mean, gentle, from the sake of when the animal falls, from that point on, photos, packing, skinning, take care of that velvet. So, guys, we're going to do one more question. We'll do 2 more questions, I guess, and then we're going to call it a night. But what's our last 2 questions?
What advice do you have for life-size mounts when dealing with hooves and pads, for instance, in bears?
That's fantastic. I know where I cut it off because I'm scared to death. But you walk us through what we should do.
So for you got a nice bear on the ground and you decide you want to do a rug mount. Okay, so you're gonna, as you're making your cut up, for example, we'll talk about the front leg here. You go up and you got the main pad here. For a rug, that main pad does not stay. Okay. Once we get it into the shop, we actually cut around that main pad and we get rid of it. We don't need it, okay? All the individual toe pads, you do need to save, okay? And so
for a rug.
For a rug, right. Now for a life size, and this is a really good question because I have a lot of guys will take that pad and they'll cut up through the middle of that pad. Don't do that. Okay.
So for life
Those
size.
for a life
Rug,
size.
pad,
Okay.
no. Life size, yes, pad.
Right. So that main pad there, once you get this back from the tanners, those pads sometimes are really difficult to sew up. Okay. And so I have my own personal cut, and what you start at the small toe. And once you make your cut up the foot here, then I leave about 1/4 of an inch around, and I cut up along the edge of the foot up to that the end of the small toe, okay? And that's where I start peeling. And that, like I said, I leave about 1/4 of an inch or so of skin, so that allows me some nice, good, strong leather to sew it back up. And you'll never, ever see that. Yeah, right. The pad will tear. It's really soft. It's hard to sew back together. And plus, if you have a bear with a paw up or something like that, you're going to see that pad. So it's real important. I love the cut along the side of the foot. Works out a lot better for a life size.
So, long story short, if you're going to do a rug, you don't need the pads. For me personally, again, I'm the hunter, you're the taxidermist. Why we talk about this. I don't know these things, so me personally, I cut down to the base of the foot.
That's fine.
I cut through the bone right there. You can actually join it off right at the base of what we call the hand. You can join it with a knife if you don't have a saw with you, or use a saw, cut it off. I bring it all to them, rug or life size.
That's fine.
Again, for me personally, I think so many of us want to make our taxidermists happy, so we try to help you out. And we end up doing more damage than good. Yeah. And it's just one of those things that happens.
Most taxidermists would prefer to skin out the face and the feet if they can.
If they can. So again, it's your situation, how far back you in. But I think the big thing is you can go either way when skinning that feet. I know we talked about that last bear I shot. And I think, again, going towards that pinky toe, the inside of the leg, again, making sure there. Think about if you were sewing something. I know a lot of us men don't really do a lot of this, but if you personally were sewing, how much sewing do you need to make that loop? Again, so many of us make such a tight cut, and we don't think that we want to be able to go through with that pad and cinch it down.
You give yourself a 1/4 of an inch.
1/4 inch to make sure you can hide that. Again, you don't want to see the stitches like your bear got in a fight. So again, all that taxidermy work, make sure that you think about that in your head. If I was going to sew this, do I have room to hide that needle to
hide
make
the seam? You bet.
And those are the type of things that are going to help out. And again, those are all questions that I would find that taxidermist, have that relationship. We all have a banker, right? We all have the banker that we go to the bank every day. We have a relationship with them. Have financial questions, we ask them those questions. Have that relationship with your taxidermist. Again, I don't care if you never intend to have a mount, it happens. It's one of those things that you get that once in a lifetime deal. You want to be able to make those right decisions. So have a relationship with a taxidermist. Just have that quick 20-minute conversation. Hey, how do you want it? And again, everything Dean's saying definitely might not be how the taxidermist that you're going to. Everybody has their own style. You know, we're all buddies. There's probably 8 taxidermists in our little group of friends. And we all do stuff. You guys all do stuff differently. I mean, you know,
talk to them. Now's the time to talk to them.
Now's the time to talk to them. Make that relationship. You'll probably learn some good hunting spots from your taxidermist as well. So they're in the know. There's no doubt about it. So guys, that is it for our questions, guys. We're going to wrap up. Again, Dean Hendrickson, Rocky Mountain Wildlife Studios. He's on Facebook. You're on Facebook right now watching this. Go to Rocky Mountain Wildlife Studios. I think there's a lion on that front cover there. Give that page a like and make sure if you have questions, send him a private message. You're great about getting back to it. That's how we met. Answer the questions, you know, going through that. So make sure you follow through there. Again, I'm Nate Zielinski. Again, like always, we have that new Facebook page. Nate Zielinski, go there. Give us a like on Facebook there. A huge thanks to Bowtech for letting us use their live stream, letting us go live tonight. You're also probably watching on the Diamond Facebook page, the Bowtech Instagram page, Tightline Outdoors, or Nate Zielinski. Guys, again, remember, mark it on your calendar. Make sure you stay tuned. We're going to have a lot more guests in studio going through this wrap-up of our Phase 2 and into Phase 3 of our scouting. So we're going to have a lot of interesting guests here. We got a great lineup coming up. So again, every Monday night, 7 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. for everybody here in the Rockies region. Again, comment your questions. Make sure we get your topic. If we haven't talked about something you want to hear, send us a private message. Send us a comment. We'll definitely make sure we make a show for you. And guys, make sure you do not miss. Again, it's all about the live stream right here. Wednesday evenings, you have got Chef Collins. We're talking about taxidermy when you get this big greasy bear. You know, it's one of those things that I look at this bear and I'm like, man, that's a great bear. What do I do with my bear meat? Chef Collins will teach you how to cook everything that you harvest. So make sure you go to the live stream for Chef Collins. Also, make sure you go through the live stream for Randy Newberg. So again, all that is on Wednesday evenings. So make sure you stay tuned to all their live feeds. I promise you're going to learn a lot. Guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Again, I'm Nate Zielinski, Dean Hickerson. Have a great time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.